In this presentation, we're going to consider the relationship between trade and the environment. So let's get started. You'll recall that it's generally agreed by economists that openness to trade, or trade liberalisation, is good for economic growth. But what's the effect of greater international trade on the environment? International trade impacts negatively on the environment, owing to 6 main drivers. The first is that trade provokes changes in allocative efficiency. That is, specialisation and comparative advantage more efficiently utilise natural resources than policies of national or local self-sufficiency, which in turn leads to intensification of production in those goods. Secondly, as a consequence, we see changes in the scale or level of economic activity. International trade increases the scale of production in particular goods, which in turn puts pressure on the environment. Why? Because more production demands more energy and natural resources, such as land and water. Third, by altering the sectoral composition of output, countries which specialise in more polluting sectors may experience greater environmental damage from trade, and vice versa. Fourth, by increasing the demand for international transport, trade encourages greater freight traffic in the form of trucks, ships, and aircraft. All of that traffic relies on fossil fuels, which in turn contribute to climate change. Fifth, by influencing the incentives and possibilities of transferring environmental goods and services, trade can have both a negative and a positive impact on the environment. For example, on the one hand, trade opens up the possibility of renewable energy technologies being traded across the globe. But on the other hand, open borders also mean that hazardous wastes are traded across borders too. Finally, by altering the public willingness to introduce and pay for environmental improvements, trade can have a negative impact on the environment. It's not all bad though, and there are many ways in which international trade can have a positive impact on the environment. For example, as I've said, it allows for imports of environmentally friendly products, such as fuel-efficient automobiles, sugar-based ethanol, and the like. It brings technological innovation, which can, for example, save energy. Multinational corporations can bring global standards to where the local alternative is environmentally less friendly. Consumers can express environmental preferences via buying habits. For example, you might have bought dolphin-free tuna precisely because it's available and you care about environmentally friendly trade. And finally, multilateral agreements offer the potential to use trade restrictions as a means of achieving an environmental goal. For example, trade sanctions are used in the Montreal Protocol on Ozone Depletion and in CITES, the Convention on Illegal Trade of Endangered Species. Economists also point to what's called the income effect, which is captured in the environmental Kuznets curve, an hypothesis named for the economist Simon Kuznets. The environmental Kuznets curve is a hypothesized relationship between environmental quality and economic development. Following the hypothesis, various indicators of environmental degradation tend to get worse as modern economic growth occurs, until average income reaches a certain point over the course of development, at which point the economy has enough wealth in it to pay for environmental protections and policies. The hypothesis is held true in some countries and for some environmental issues, notably water and air quality, but it is hotly contested by economists. For example, the rapid and devastating loss of biodiversity in rich countries such as Australia and the United States suggests the EKC does not hold in that case. At the outset, we asked whether international trade was good, bad, or indifferent for the environment. It would be nice to be able to have a definitive answer, but as we've seen, the relationship between trade and the environment is complex. On the one hand, greater trade can and does lead to intensification of production and economic growth, which in turn leads to often very devastating outcomes for the environment. On the other hand, there is evidence supporting the idea that richer countries, which have got rich from greater trade, are in a better position to impose stringent environmental regulations. But that argument doesn't hold for all environmental issues. There are no easy answers in this.